The rest of the story. I know that just... You ever heard Paul Harvey? Do you remember Paul Harvey? He was a radio announcer, old school radio. He's long gone now, but radio announcer would come on and he would share a story. But it was the background. And you didn't know the background? We knew the result, but we just didn't know. So he'd get into this backstory of something, and he would unfold this, and you're just listening, and okay, what is it? Well, who he's trying to guess who he's talking about or which famous event, and he'd get to a certain point in his story, and he would say, "And now the rest of the story," with that voice that he had as the radio announcer. Very cool. I don't have a voice like that. Famous line, and we can, if you don't go onto YouTube and just search it out and just listen to all the different cool stories that are on there. We've just celebrated Easter. And last Sunday, we celebrated as a church. Did we not? Wasn't that fun? We had beach balls and, we were cheering and yelling in here, and Jesus is the champion was the kind of the resounding phrase in the story of Jesus raising from the dead. This morning, I just want to look again, just briefly back at this story. The disciples are excited. Let's wind it up and wind it back and just kind of recapture this. The disciples are excited. They're full of anticipation and wonder what's going to happen next. They've left everything to follow Jesus. Jesus comes along and they're fishing, and he calls them and he says, "Follow me." They drop their nets and they follow Jesus. Different people from different vocations, and what they did is just looking at what it was and what's going on. And obviously this Jesus sparked something within them and attracted them to the point when he says, "Follow me," they say yes. I don't know about you, but we don't follow too easily, do we? Because you and I are rebellious by nature, and we're skeptical. Okay, let's move on. That's enough judging me, right? But we are. And so, you know what? For these individuals to do that is just mind-blowing at the same time. That they would even entertain this. But that's what they did. So they've been leaving everything, and they travel around for a period of 3 years. They're seeing Jesus, and they're hearing about him teaching on the kingdom of God. And they're just what is going on? They see the miracles. They see, people in crowds gathering to listen. And they're part of this. And it's exciting. I don't know about you, but when you're part of something and it's bigger than you are, and you start to see everything that's going on, there's something that goes on. It stirs us up. And so here's what's going on in these individuals' lives, and they're seeing the miracles. Like, they're seeing people coming, and they're going to knock a hole in the roof, and they're going to let a guy down, and then Jesus prays over him and he gets healed. What's going on? The people are even saying they've seen nothing like this. They've never seen anything like this. And most of these people were regular religious church-going type people in their Judaism and in their way of worship, Old Testament structure. They were religious. And they said, "We've never seen anything like this." Intrigue, wonder, what is going on? And now they're about to enter into Jerusalem. Now, I might have talked a little bit about this, and I'm just repeating myself, but how many know that a good story needs repeating? Hello? And so here they are. They're about to enter into Jerusalem. There's so much symbolism in this thing. Jerusalem, the city of God, the dwelling place of God. Jerusalem. Let this not be lost on us. The disciples are going, what is going to happen next? We've been in the countryside. Now we're in the city. And let's also believe and look at this thing in what it says in the significance and the symbolism. It's time for Passover. They're coming to Jerusalem. People from all over the countryside are coming into this place, and they're going to be celebrating the Passover feast to remember what? Let's go back to Egypt, when the people were under the Egyptian bondage. And there was so much slavery and so much stuff coming against them. God speaks to Moses out in the wilderness, and he goes, hey, gets his attention by a burning bush. And then he has a conversation. He says, you know what? You need to go to Pharaoh, and you need to say to Pharaoh, let my people go. And then Moses, in reluctant obedience, then does that, and he goes there, and he goes before Pharaoh, and then we see a number of different things that happen next, which is spiritual warfare, the warfare of what God is going to do, and what the gods of the land were trying not to let happen. So we see the plagues that come upon Egypt. And one of the plagues was that the death angel was going to come and go over the land. And so what does God do? He speaks to Moses and he says, sacrifice the lamb. And in that blood of the lamb, take the hyssop branch, dip it in, and then put it over top of the doors and on the side of the doorposts. And it's why? Because it was symbolism for the death angel. When the death angel would come over the land, he would see that sacrifice. He would see that blood that had been poured out, and he would pass over that home. And those people in that home would be saved. They would not die. There's powerful symbolism in what happened in this event. Now when they're, how many years later, are remembering this story, and Jesus comes in to the city at this time. There's a little bit of foreshadowing here. How many love a good story when there's intrigue and a little bit of glimpse of what's coming? Right? Just me, I'm just getting excited this morning. Calm down. Okay, pulse. Okay. This is my resting time. Things are lining up. Disciples are excited. But here they are. Listen to how human these guys are. As excited as they are, as in such a time of anticipation that they are of what's happening and the events that are going on, they're still trying to figure out who's going to be the greatest. They're still trying to figure out, hey, who gets to sit beside you, Jesus, to the right of you? They wrestled with that. They struggled amongst themselves. They struggled within themselves. Place of importance. Jesus is wrestling and going through because he knows what's going to happen. He knows what's coming next, and he's wrestling. So he says, hey, let's go to the garden. We're going to have a prayer meeting, guys. You know what? And they gather around, and he's thinking, yes, these guys, we're going to gather around. We're going to pray. I need this right now. This is what I'm going through. He wrestles. He's praying, sweats droplets of blood. And what happens? They fall asleep. I think there's a pretty good glimpse of human nature here, isn't it? Those who have been in the inner circle and have been following around for 3 years, they've been seeing the miracles, they've been seeing all these things transpire and take place. One portrays him for a little bag of money. And then when he's at a place of destitute and just what's going on and the circumstance, one of them even denies that they know him. Not just once, not just twice, but how many times? 3 times. Jesus is then arrested, tried, accused, sentenced to death. Pilate washes his hands because, you know what? After all, he's committed no crime. The religious people were out for death, but really what God the Father was needing was blood. And Jesus goes through the most horrific things where he's walking through the street, he's been beaten, been scourged, At this time, he's walking through the streets and he's bleeding and he's carrying this post beam for the cross. And he's carrying this and they're spitting and mocking on him. They take him up to the hill and then they nail him to that cross. And eventually he dies. I try to recapture that in my mind, and I think one of the things I've seen that really kind of brings that to light is I think it's The Passion of the Christ, that movie. If you ever have a chance, just watch that. I don't think it's Hollywood, but it's not sensationalized. It's just being factual, because that's what they did. Just unbelievable. And he dies. And we call this Friday that all this took place on, we call it good. What is that about? Because to the disciples and their context at that time, do you think that they were calling it Good Friday? You see, in the midst of horrific times, we don't call things good. Maybe your situation right now is on a Monday. You're not calling that Good Monday. People will look at you like you're crazy if you are. Good Friday. Horrific. What Jesus is going through and what he went through, and the disciples are looking at this thing and just scratching their head and just going, what in the world is going on? There's confusion, shock, discouragement, disillusionment. This wasn't what was expected. This wasn't the way they had formulated in their mind of how it was going to happen. Reflect upon your life right now. And maybe you're in a situation of Friday. You're in a circumstance of Friday and it's horrific. I was watching Hollywood award speeches one time, and Matthew McConaughey, is that his name? Yeah. He's giving this speech, and I'm leaning in, I'm listening to him, and you know what? The phrase that stuck out in the speech that he gave was this. He says, life is hard sometimes. I don't know about you, but those disciples were probably going, yeah, no kidding, right? And maybe you have those same words this morning in your own perspective of what you're wrestling through and what you're dealing with in life right now, because you're looking at this thing and you're saying, good? Yeah, whatever. I face these feelings. I face discouragement, disillusionment, life unfolding, and you're just left reeling and wondering, how is this good? Can anything good even come out of this? What's going on? And sometimes, feeling hurt and angry with all these emotions going on, and just like these disciples, God, why is this happening? What, God, are you doing? And these are great questions. And I can honestly say, you know what? Usually in the midst of the horrific, I don't get an answer to those questions. I just come across this, and it's a number of different people. Oswald Chambers, Elizabeth Elliot, Joni Eareckson Tada, Francis Chan. Listen to what they say. Oswald Chambers. When a man is in despair, thinking we'll never get him out, it must be the sheer creativity effort of God. Therefore, when a man gets to despair, he's in the right attitude to receive from God that which he cannot gain for himself. You see, on that Good Friday, Man couldn't get out of that. The disciples couldn't fix it. They couldn't make it all better and work it out. God was needed in that time. Joni Eareckson, faith isn't the ability to believe long and far into the misty future. It's simply taking God at His word and taking the next step. You see, oftentimes we just need that in our midst to take that first step towards God. Elizabeth Elliot said, waiting on God requires the willingness to bear uncertainty, to carry within oneself the unanswered question, lifting the heart to God about it whenever it intrudes upon one's thoughts. It's easier to talk oneself into a decision that has no permanence than to wait patiently. Patience, endurance, struggle. We don't like that stuff because it's not good. And our desire is for the good. Just some words of individuals who are looking at the pain and the things that we go through this world. And I think in some essence they're saying, hang in there. The answer might not come as to the why and the what in that midst. I want to continue because we think Friday, and then Paul Harvey would say in his life, and now the rest of the story. You see, the rest of the story goes like this. Early on the Sunday morning, they went to the tomb to anoint the body. And what they found was the stone had been rolled away and the tomb was empty. In chapter 24 of Luke, I want to pick it up at verse 4 and just read that for us, continuing. And as they stood there puzzled, two men suddenly appeared to them, clothed in dazzling robes. And the women were terrified and bowed with their face to the ground. Then the men asked, why are you looking among the dead for someone who is alive? He isn't here. He is risen from the dead. Remember, he's reminding them, remember, he says, remember what he told you back in Galilee, that the Son of Man must be betrayed into the hands of sinful men and be crucified, and that he would rise again on the third day. You see, they had forgotten about God's promises in the midst of their Friday. And here now, there's the reminder to those who had gone through this suffering, who had gone through this understanding or misunderstanding or confusion as to what was going on in their circumstance in the natural. And the angels are saying, remember, he's come back to life again. And then verse 8 says, then they remembered that he had said this. There was a dawning. You're right. We forgot. We forgot what God had promised. We had forgot what was going on. And so what did they do? Verse 9, chapter 24 in Luke. So they rushed back to the tomb to tell his 11 disciples. They rushed to tell. You see what happens when we have a dawning, a revelation of the truth of God, of His promises being fulfilled in our lives. We can't help but rush to tell. Remember back when Jesus healed that man of leprosy? He heals the man of leprosy, and then he gives them the ceremonial direction as to what he's to do. Now go back to the priest, and so that he would make sure that you're clean, and he would signify you're clean, because otherwise he would still have to be walking around with this label of uncleanness. So this man is healed, but Jesus says this to him: shh, don't go tell anybody. I marvel at that, because what did he do? He went telling everybody about what Jesus had done for him. You see, there's something that happens when we have a transition in our heart from a place of brokenness, destitute, disillusionment, to a place of revelation of light and what God has done when we encamp in the freedom and the liberty and the promise that God has given us. I don't know about you. I'm getting a little excited thinking about that. The desire that we have as human beings to go from this bad to the good. And that's what God does. That's why we can call it Good Friday. Because of God's interaction in human history. I don't know, I just this morning want to stir our hearts a little bit. Because some of us are stuck in our Friday. We're stuck in the Friday. We're stuck there. And I'm just saying, remember what God promised? Remember what He said? And what He said to you in your personal and private life as you read the Word, as you listened to sermons, as you gain truth in your life, but you're in a Friday moment. Come on! This is an opportunity for God to move in that circumstance. Are you ready for God to move? That's the thing. Joni says, take a step of faith. It's time to move out because God's progressive. You see, He didn't camp on the Friday. He was pulling us along so that we would understand the Sunday. He's moving ahead, people. But sometimes we're so disillusioned and we can't see it, and that's why we need somebody come along and interject for us. The angels came to those ladies and He said, remember? They said, remember? And maybe it's just me this morning to remind you. Maybe it's someone else that would come alongside of you in this life and just say, remember? Remember what God said? Remember the promises that He's given to you? Remember you know what? Okay, where are my notes here? Here we go. Here's the thing. Have you ever heard this famous sermon by Reverend S.M. Lockridge? It's a Friday, but Sunday's a coming? Okay, we're going to listen to it because he says that way better than me. That's truth. That's what we celebrate on Easter Sunday, Resurrection Day. And last day, we did it with the kids and family, kind of a service. And I just thought, you know what? I just want to let it linger one more Sunday in regards to the rest of the story. The revelation of God coming down and dwelling among us and what He did and what He achieved and accomplished so that we can live, people. So that we can live. We can live. This is the rest of the story. We're going to go into a new series. It's called The Continued Story. And we're going to start to look at now what the early church was like, what the early disciples and the early followers of Christ did after Resurrection Sunday, how they impacted their world and the different things that they experienced. We're going to look at the day of Pentecost when the Holy Spirit came down to come alongside of us, the Parakletos. I don't want to get too far into that, but just give you a little bit of teaser in regards to where we're going to go. The continued story, because this story continues on. It's just not Friday. It's just not Saturday. It's just not Sunday. It's Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday as well. And we want to talk about those days. What happens in those days? What happened to the early believers in those days? What did they do in the midst of what they did in their experiences of when God said, go into the world and make disciples of all nations? And we get to read the story continuing in the book of Acts, what the early disciples did. And I don't know about you, but I'm excited about that. Because that's the reality of where we live. How many years later? The rest of the story. The rest of the story. I don't know about you. You know what? Go to the gym or whatever, and you can wear heart monitors, and then they, on a TV, show your heart rate up on there. I'm going to do that for Sunday, just to see. You guys can see when I'm really getting anointed and excited here. Because my heart's just pounding. Because I believe in this stuff. I'm convinced of this stuff. And here's the thing. Are we convinced of this? And you know what? Maybe we just say, no, I'm just not there, John. Because you're so in your Friday. You're sowing your Friday, and I'm just, trying to stir it. I'm just trying to remind you of, and I'm going to ask the band to come back up because we're going to, conclude with not beach balls and all that kind of stuff this morning, but just in celebration of singing, some songs where we can clap our hands a little bit and say, you know what? Yes, God, yes, I believe that you can. How many believe that God can make a breakthrough in your life today? How many believe for that? Like, honestly, right? How can we believe for that? And you know what? It's like Joni said in just her simple statement, that first step of faith. And so, you know what? As we sing this, just join in as your step. Maybe you're a Reserve Baptist. Maybe you're a Mennonite. I'm sitting on my hands right now. I don't know what you are in your background at church or whatever your expression is. But you know what? Just to say in your own way, God, here am I in my Friday, and I need you to pull me out. I need to see something. How many would be brave enough to say, Lord, I need to see something change in my circumstance? I know that sounds pretty brash or pretty brazen, but why not? What's the alternative? Right? Oh, yeah, but Friday. Let us help pull you out of that thing. That's what we do as believers with one another. We help encourage one another in this journey. So let's do a little bit of celebrating today as we sing some good songs.